My name is Karen Tucker, and I'm CEO of the Churchill Club. Welcome to the program. Our topic centers on something with enormous consequences that is the subject of great debate. It is called Jobs Lost, Jobs Gained, Workforce Transitions in a Time of Automation. With us to weigh in are two distinguished sets of speakers. First, Michael Chewy of McKinsey Global Institute will converse with Tim O'Reilly of O'Reilly Media and Zoe Baird of the Markle Foundation. And then James Manyika of MGI will lead a discussion with John Donahoe of ServiceNow and Jeff Weiner of LinkedIn. And there will be a short amount of time for audience questions after each session, so you can be thinking about your questions. We certainly thank our partners, McKinsey Global Institute and McKinsey & Company, especially James Manyika, Michael Chewy, Rebecca Raboy, Hope Comstock. It's always exciting and stimulating to dive in together, as we've done so many times over the years, in the interest of sparking new understanding, connections, and actions around innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. The hashtags tonight are Churchill Club and New World of Work, and you will find other Twitter handles in your programs. So to kick off the discussions, let's welcome Michael Chewy, who will share some fascinating new research findings, and then call up our first set of speakers. Michael.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, and thanks for coming this evening. I think a lot of us have seen a lot of headlines that worry about a robot job apocalypse, and they're scary headlines because you hear these things, we're not going to have any jobs, the machines. Did anybody see the tweet, We Did, the robot that did the backflip, right? I mean, and you say, gosh, what can these machines not do? And that's, as I said, scary. And I don't know about you, but when I'm scared, I return to my roots and start doing some analysis. No, anyway, I do some analysis. So at the McKinsey Global Institute, we have this tick. We like to analyze things that scare us. So, one of the things that we did earlier this year was publish a report which was looking at the potential for automation across the entire workforce. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do there was not only look at every occupation, but all of the constituent activities within every occupation. And so for each of those, we scored it against 18 different capabilities which potentially could be automated, looked at over 2,000 different detailed work activities across almost 50 countries in the world, and tried to understand the potential for automation going forward. And it is considerable. If you look out to 2030, there's a wide range of different scenarios. By the way, we view this really importantly as not something that you just observe. This isn't like astronomy. This is more like chess. Which scenario actually obtains will vary depending on the choices we all make, the choices we make as citizens, the choices we make as business leaders, the choices that we make as workers. But that said, if you look out to 2030, perhaps up to 30% of the work that we currently do could in fact be done by machines. But the midpoint of our automation scenario is it actually ends up being 15. But it's actually a very different scenario depending on the country. In countries that have lower wage rates, we expect actually the rate of automation to be lower because then the business case for automation to be less compelling. And in countries such as the United States, Germany, or Japan, actually we expect it to be quite a bit higher. And so potentially in the US, we might be looking at something in the range of a percentage in the 20s. So that does bring up the question, right? Will there be enough work for people? And again, we're not in the business of predicting the future, but we did want to just analyze things at this fine-grained level and ask ourselves, can we imagine scenarios where there is enough work to offset the work that would be automated potentially by all these brilliant machines? And we looked at a number of different drivers of work. Tim O'Reilly, who'll come up in a moment, talks about what's the work that needs to be done, or what's the work that needs doing. And if you look at a bunch of factors that are going to occur in the world or potentially could occur in the world, one is rising prosperity. Another billion people will enter the consuming class, particularly in developing markets, over the next 10 or 20 years. They'll all need more media, they'll all need more cars, they'll need more apparel. That will drive additional work. Aging, by the way, which we worry about as a productivity drag, also will generate more work. People will need more health care. We also talk about increasing investment in infrastructure and buildings. Again, we know that's necessary in developing markets and developed markets. And there's some other things that we think about too, such as the development and deployment of technology, a lot of what happens here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and other potential scenarios. If you have more women in the workforce, you might actually start to have a bunch of what we call unpaid work at home, whether it's childcare or cleaning, cooking, et cetera. That might actually be part of the market going forward, and that could generate additional work. And so when you actually compare those two things, the net of the additional potential, and that's just a limited number of things. We always know that there are new jobs being created, new activities being created that could potentially generate more labor demand. People might know across the bay in Oakland, there's a stadium for some people to pay money to watch other people play video games. At MGI, we would not have predicted that 10 years ago. New things are always being created. But then, so if you look at all those, there are definitely scenarios where there is enough work for people to do, even net of the things that might be automated. That said, a different question is, can we get people from doing what they are doing now to the jobs of the future? And we think that's a huge challenge. In our midpoint scenario around the world, 75 million people might need to change occupational categories. But that could range up to 375 million, depending on the pace of automation around the world. Again, different scenarios potentially could happen. So that's a huge challenge. And quite frankly, we haven't necessarily solved the ability to retrain this scale of people, in the mid-career, past their second 2 decades of life. And then finally, another question to be asked is, what about incomes? People talk about inequality. And again, we can't predict what everyone's going to make. But if you look at the net of all of the trends that we looked at, and again, it's a limited number of trends, plus the automation, if you net all of that out, we've seen historically in the past few years a hollowing of the middle, right? Again, the middle wage occupations being under the most pressure. Given the things that we've modeled, that might potentially continue as well, and that's another set of challenges to think about. So again, the report you can freely download from the web at McKinsey.com, so I'm not going to go through everything, but feel free to take a look at it. That was my commercial, and with that, let me bring up some smart people. So Tim and Zoe, if you would join me, please. Thank you.
Well, I get pride of place.
You get
You
the
want to sit in the middle?
Tim, let me start with you. You've mentioned before that that there's no shortage of things that need doing, and I mentioned a few of a small number, basically 7 drivers of potential additional labor demand. Could you talk a little more about other places where you see work that needs doing?
Well, first of all, I do really want to point everybody to one of your graphs in here, which
Thank you.
Which I think it was Exhibit 13, which just jumped out at me, where it says rising consumer incomes are the largest source of job creation. And that is, if people have money, they will spend it. So we need to make sure that we get money into the hands of ordinary people, not into the hands of just a few people. So in some sense, inequality and jobs are very tightly connected. Because to me, there are 3 big drivers of jobs. And the first one is the one that you're asking the question about, which is just this stuff that needs doing, for Christ's sake. When people say there's not going to be enough jobs, they go, there's plenty of work. Just look around. There's so much that needs doing, and we have to ask ourselves, why aren't we doing it? What are the systemic obstacles? And I think we're going to have to deal with climate change. We're going to be rebuilding Houston every few years, until we figure out that, we actually need to actually start moving people. We already have hundreds of millions of displaced people in the world. We're going to have a lot more of them. We're going to need to build whole new cities. So look at the work just in the energy transition, dealing with climate change. So that's one. The transition in our economy as we have aging populations that we have to deal with, the possibility of disruptive transformation of our healthcare industry from kind of the old factory model where you put all the big heavy equipment in one place to one where we can actually do a diagnosis with a smartphone. How would we do that differently? Reinventing the economy to solve real problems for real people will produce plenty of work. But the second thing is the one that's related to that rising income graph. And that is that if you look at the history of every technological innovation, we created new jobs because as we made one thing into a commodity, we found a way to make that commodity valuable again. You know, we made more cloth, and we invented fashion so that people bought new kinds of clothes and bought clothes more frequently. You know, we didn't say, okay, you've got your one suit of homespun, we're done. You know, we didn't say, oh wow, we only need 2% of the population to produce food. There's no more food industry. You all get your oatmeal. You know, I mean, your Scottish oats. You know, you kind of no. Or I'm Irish. You know, you got your potatoes and your cabbage. We're done. No, you look around in a rich society. You give people money. They go, entertain me with food. Make it really special and good. And we sell ideas. Food is food plus ideas. You know, this isn't just coffee. It's coffee from this amazing grower in Sri Lanka, and it's roasted by this amazing roaster in Emeryville, and it's worth more than any other coffee, because it's unique and special. That's, we've decommodified our commodities with this creative economy, which is what people will do if they have money to spend. And then, of course, anyway, I just think that there's no reason whatsoever for us to run out of work, except for the fact that we've failed to circulate the fruits of productivity well enough. There's plenty to go around. It's just not going around.
Great. So let me bring you in. In some of our research, what we have generally found is the skills and or education necessary for the new jobs going forward is, and to a certain extent, going to be higher than they are for the jobs of today. At the Markle Foundation, you're doing a lot of work, both studying as well as implementing this idea of trying to prepare people for the next jobs. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing there?
Sure. Let me step back from the vision and the data to talk about the people. So we all know that people love their smartphones, and almost everybody has one now, no matter what your income level. In fact, Jeff Weiner has an amazing quote about someone he hired at LinkedIn who created an app for homeless people to better find homeless shelters. I mean, that's an incredible statement. And people stream video, they stream music, but at the same time, people feel completely disenfranchised from the economic benefit of these tools. The gap between people's feeling of inclusion in the digital economy and their feeling of being left behind is growing. It's wide. There was a recent Pew poll where 78% of Americans just last month said that they expect that automation is going to drive that gap even wider, and people are deeply concerned about it. And rightly, because it was great McKinsey data has shown automation has taken away, I think the number was 6 million middle skill jobs since 2007. James shaking his head, so I've got that right. So there's a huge disruption, and the message we've been giving people for decades is, Jeff, I just talked about one of your data points about the homeless app, so I'm glad you joined us. There's a huge disconnect between people's enthusiasm for technology and their feeling of benefiting from it. We've been telling people for decades, go to college, get a 4-year degree, and you'll succeed. And 70% of Americans do not have a BA, and that has been true for decades. So the singular message we've had for people hasn't worked. At the same time, we did a poll last year where we showed that 87% of Americans believe that they need lifelong skills training in order to succeed. But they look out at the universe of what's available to them, and they see that most education ends at 18 or 22. They don't think financial aid is available to them. They go to an unemployment office or a workforce center, and the people there don't know what digital economy jobs look like. So we are at an inflection point where the people in this community have a tremendous opportunity to contribute, and it's a very exciting business model as well. And that is to create the second wave of digital disruption of jobs, to use the very same technologies, automation and AI, to transform the labor market so it works for people. So just briefly, a couple of examples of what that would look like, and we can get into this if you like later. We've actually started to do some of this with LinkedIn in an effort called Skillful. And if you take an employer and enable them to identify the skills they need in a job, rather than looking for the bachelor's degree, they can open up a much larger pool of potential applicants with potentially greater targeted skills to fill those jobs and make more people eligible for the jobs that exist. There's 6 million unfilled jobs in this country. The potential for creating businesses that enable people to compete based on skills rather than the increase of the use of the bachelor's degree is tremendous. And we need all kinds of tools and apps and innovations coming out of this community to enable that to happen. We see now that the opposite is the direction that we're going. So an entry-level computer systems administrator job, 45% of people who hold those jobs have a bachelor's degree, but 75% of job postings call for a bachelor's degree. So they rule out 75% of Americans even being considered for those jobs. Similarly, we need data and tools for educators to train more rapidly to the skills that are needed. We need social media to show people what these jobs look like so they can envision themselves in them. And there's just a tremendously rich potential. But it really is an ambition we should hold to create a second wave of digital disruption of jobs.
Can you spend a minute just talking, we'll come back. Can you spend a minute just talking about what Skillful is, just as an example or a concrete example of what you might talk?
Sure. So Skillful started in Colorado. We went live a year ago, and already we have over 100 businesses using the tools that we've developed, and McKinsey was a significant part of this in revealing the skills that are needed for jobs in advanced manufacturing, IT across all sectors from healthcare to financial services. We're moving into healthcare jobs and retail, and we're also moving out into other states. There's a tremendous interest among governors in this because they look at their labor markets, they know they're broken, they're trying to figure out how to enable companies to get the workers they need so that they can grow, and how to enable people to feel that they're part of the digital economy, and at the same time drive educators toward training the right things. So Skillful is basically a systems integrator with an ambition to do that based on a skills-based labor market.
Tim, you were going to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, companies need to make a commitment to training people rather than just saying, well, I can't find them. If you think about, lifelong education, it's going to happen in the workforce. And I think we need to start thinking more about education as a benefit. Think about Google 20% time. What if we said, and actually I want to back up a little bit and think about each successive wave of automation in the past has led actually to taking people out of the workforce and putting them into education. First we took small children out of the fields and factories and smokestacks and chimneys, and we said, oh, we're going to send you to school. And then we took high school age kids out of the fields and sent them to school. And then we took our returning GIs and we said, we're going to send you to school. And now we need to basically say, we're going to hire you and we're going to send you to school when you're on the job. We're going to train you. Why is it this idea that, well, sorry, I just can't find anybody? Go, no, make them.
I actually think, Tim, that employers are very interested in training their workforce. What we really need to get to, and this is why I think we need to think about skills, what we really need to get to is a modular, disaggregated network kind of environment
absolutely.
where people can pick up skills in one sector and demonstrate in another that the skills
Totally.
they have are valuable to fill those
Yeah.
jobs.
Yeah, we need to get away from the credential and just go, okay, can you do this thing? And,
Right,
and how do you
right.
prove that you can do it? And how do we bring you along so that you can do it?
Let's come back to another topic that we touched on briefly, which is about what are the rewards of working? What are the rewards of being in the workforce? Tim, you've talked about enough to go around, but it's not going around. Can you talk a little bit about your views on returns to capital versus labor and
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've started to think a lot about recently is the fact that our financial statements are even designed so that we basically show people as a cost and the return to capital as the goal of the system. We talk about the bottom line. Well, it's the residual, what's left over, and it belongs to the owners of capital. There's a wonderful book which I just discovered, because I used a line in my own book. I said, one day we will look back on the divine right of capital in the same way that we now look back on the divine right of kings. And somebody read that and said, oh, have you read Marjorie Kelly's book, The Divine Right of Capital? And it's this fantastic book written in 2001, and it's about financial statements. And what if our financial statement said, here's the return to labor, and here's the return to capital? And that was, they showed both of them as outputs of the business, as opposed to one as an input and a cost to be minimized. And you think about how differently we would organize the economy. And I started thinking, there actually are examples of this hiding in plain sight. And I've become obsessed with I want to start doing a little bit like Plutarch's parallel lives. If you guys, I'm a classicist by training, and Plutarch, he was really the father of biography. He wrote these parallel biographies of Greeks and Romans. Okay, here's Demosthenes, and here's Cicero, or whatever. Here's some Athenian general, here's a Roman general, and what we learn from their parallel lives. And I go, well, here's Walmart and here's Costco. Here's Columbia Sportswear and here's REI. What do they do similarly? What do they do differently? And you kind of look, REI is fascinating. It's a co-op. And they actually outperform their public market competitors in any real market. Better sales, same-store sales, better sales growth, but they also pay their people more, and they give the bulk of their profits back to their customers in the form of a rebate, so they're not very profitable, but they don't have to because they're a co-op. And you kind of go, so here's capitalism that's hiding in plain sight, that's kind of doing it like Marjorie Kelly describes, where the returns are not just to capital, the returns are clearly to customers and to employees, and it works. And I feel like there's probably a lot more of those that we just don't notice because we're so enmeshed in the system as it works today without realizing that it could be different.
So I'd love to hear, you are in the privileged position of being able to connect with leaders, both the policymaker side as well as the business side and civil society. What are you hearing with regard to incomes and people's concrete actions that can be taken there?
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm hearing is very disturbing, which is a remarkably rapid movement by both Democratic and Republican policymakers, from Mark Warner, who made his money in tech, to Donald Trump, that is looking at regulating automation, AI, technology companies generally. I think that is in part a reaction to this question of, where's the wealth going? But perhaps even more a maturity of the industry. It's been true for pretty much every major industry that it's gone through a period of innovation, and then it becomes an established business, and then there's a period of monopoly, and you can look at the railroads, you can look at every form of early communications this fits with, and then there's a period of regulation. And I think there's a question now of whether it is possible to enter what may be a period of regulation. You see it obviously with the EU, which is way ahead of the US. Is it possible to enter a period of regulation that doesn't inhibit innovation, growth, and competition. And to my mind, addressing this felt public need for the opportunity to participate in the economic benefits of the digital economy is going to be the linchpin to whether or not this is done right, because the movement toward people feeling disenfranchised is rapid, and it's not playing out well. And I don't think this is just a matter, I mean, I've been very concerned, for example, about how to address the question of recruitment of children into terrorism over the internet or sex trafficking over the internet. Those are very discrete problems, but these economic issues are not discrete problems. They could comprehensively affect the trajectory of our businesses. And most of these, businesses today that have been so successful are based in the US, but that isn't a given. So I think that's an enormous potential repercussion of all of this.
Several big Chinese ones too. Yeah. I'm going to come to audience questions soon, so if you have some, be prepared. But what I'd love to ask of both of you is, what are the actions that people can take? Whether they're a business leader, whether they're someone engaging with their legislator or a policymaker, whether or not they're an individual worker. What are the sorts of things that people should think about when they think about this future of work, with all the things that are changing?
The first thing I think about is that we actually have to believe it can be different. I really hung up on this divine right of kings idea. There was a time when a set of people decided that they didn't buy that anymore. And when we won the American Revolution and the British resigned, George III thought that George Washington would be crowned king in America and was utterly astonished that he went back to his farm. We basically had a new idea about how to do things. And I think we have this incredible moment where people are, as Zoe said, disaffected. There is going to be a revolution. I mean, Andy McAfee said over breakfast one morning, he said, all this stuff about the robots taking over, the people will rise up long before the robots do. If we don't take this moment to rethink our economy and our society in a really profound way, we're going to be in for a century of revolution and strife at a time when we're already going to be dealing with climate change and we're really facing potentially the collapse of modern civilization unless we do things radically differently. And I think we have to stop making little tweaks around the edges and assuming that everything is okay. To the political moment, I think that's been the fatal flaw of the Democrats. Just kind of everybody go back to normal, it'll be okay, and it isn't okay. We have to actually think far more boldly about what we do in the age of this immense, technological change, which could produce, incredible wealth for all of society, and yet is somehow been designed to only produce wealth for a much smaller group of people. And it's designed that way. And the first thing we have to do is to believe that we could design it better.
Zoe, what are things that people can do?
No, I completely agree with Tim. And I think the most fundamental thing is people should look at the tools and technology that they have created and figure out how they can be deployed to enable people to participate in the labor market differently. For example, eBay, growth global markets you talked about. 98% of people who sell goods on eBay are multinationals. They may or may not know it, whereas only 3% of small and medium-sized businesses sell globally.
And you don't mean large multinationals?
No, they're small and medium-sized businesses, but they sell their products all over the world, and it goes to Elizabeth, New Jersey. But it's exported over eBay. And I could give you many other examples of how what each and every one of you is doing could be deployed as a way for people to learn in a modular way, to find out what skills they have, to see what the jobs look like. Advanced manufacturing jobs People don't see themselves in those because their uncle or their brother isn't working in advanced manufacturing. But if their Facebook friends showed them what advanced manufacturing jobs looked like and that people like them were doing those jobs, then they could see themselves. You know, Google has got a significant effort going now to try to figure out how to use its assets to help people see better what jobs look like, both its business assets and philanthropic, but I urge you to think about your business assets because that's where we'll get the capital to continue and sustain and grow these activities. But I think there's a tremendous amount people can do if they simply ask themselves the question, how can I be a disruptor in a way that is going to work to advantage many people?
Yeah. One thing that I would also add is it's so important to dissociate work from jobs. Because if you find work that needs doing, it will turn into jobs. If you basically are looking for a job, you will ignore work, because you don't know how it's going to get paid for. When I started my business, it wasn't a job. It was just like there was work that needs doing. We literally, my publishing business started, was like, oh, there's no manual for SEDNOC, these for VI, these odd Unix programs. We were technical writing consultants. When we didn't have a job, there was still work, so we did the work, and then we just started selling the books on the side, and it turned out to be a way better job than the one that we, were getting from other people. Because we basically focused on, hey, there's something that needs doing here. There's no good documentation, and we started producing it, and people beat a bath to our door. And this, you look around and there's so much work, and I see people who are out of work. I go, why aren't you doing it? Clean up your neighborhood, fix your house. These things that you don't get paid for will end, I bet, if you're in a lousy neighborhood and you start cleaning up your neighborhood, people will start offering you work cleaning up their house, right? It's just like crazy stuff. Do the work.
To be fair, it is important to get paid.
It is, but there is kind of this passive, like jobs are something you find in the job supermarket. Work is something that you can always find. And, I think of, there's difference. I think of I forget, it was even maybe at a Churchill Club event. We were talking about entrepreneurship, and I thought, I saw a homeless person out on the street knitting hats and selling them. That's an entrepreneur, a lot of people who Silicon Valley entrepreneurs aren't really entrepreneurs. They're employees of venture capital firms. They got a job, basically, creating some, pitch that they could sell on to other investors.
So I'd like to open it up. Yeah, please, if you would identify yourself briefly, and I'd love your question.
Hi, well done. My name is Jason Ma. If you have one or two pieces of advice for the G20 governments, right, starting from the prime ministers, presidents, you got engineers, what would they be, given today's theme? So it's on a global level, international level, not just U.S.
I would say the first thing, again, would be focus on real problems. And this is whatever country you're in, think about how do you make life better for people? How do you solve problems for people? Technology, business, the economy, this is all about solving real problems for your people. And if you look at the great economic turnarounds, there's a fabulous book by a guy named Ha-Joon Chang. He's a South Korean economist. He said, I was born in the Middle Ages, and now I live in one of the richest countries on earth. It's like in one lifetime, here's a country that went from a standard of living that was the Middle Ages. And if he tells the story of how they did it, it was like real leadership where they said, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to, it wasn't just, this sort of, well, the magic of the market, it'll just happen. There was leadership where somebody said, this is the work that needs doing. And you see it at a massive scale in China right now where they're trying to figure that out. You see people like Elon Musk who are saying, well, great, government's not getting to it, nobody else is getting to it. I'm going to, kickstart electric cars. He's going for the work, and then he makes the jobs.
Zoe, thanks.
Yeah, my answer to that question has been that countries should create national digital economy strategies. I don't think we're in a place in this country where we'll do it, so I'm working with governors all over the country so that governors will create a digital economy strategy. But I think that means looking at your businesses and understanding where business growth can come from that can employ lots of people and can employ people who don't have four-year college diplomas and higher degrees, and those jobs are there, and the businesses won't grow if we don't expand the labor market for them. So I would have a strategy for business growth, I'd have a strategy for labor market training, and it's extremely important, and this is what I'm looking to the private sector for, because we won't have a national strategy here, and other countries are developing them, but we really need the very tools and technologies that we're using for the higher end of the market to apply to the 70%. And if we do that, I think we'll find much more innovation that will affect the whole market. I mean, surprisingly, the jobs at the upper end are more static than the jobs in the middle, and James can talk about this. And so if you really want innovation around how to drive the labor market through tools and data, that innovation's going to come in the middle. And that's where our businesses need to grow. That's where the bulk of the jobs are and will be. And that's true globally.
By the way, on that digital transformation by government, one of the things that's really always been true of new technology is government is actually often the customer that kickstarts a huge new industry. And government actually could become a customer for digital transformation as well as sort of a funder of innovation or whatever.
Right. No, that's very true, and that's part of what we are working on. That's part of our integration, is having the government spend its dollars wisely to drive creating the transparency of data, to drive the creation and sharing of data,
and also
and
just
the training.
Just the the implementation of government programs. I mean, we do a lot of work in a nonprofit. I'm associated with Code for America on actually what do we learn from the tech industry that we can apply to literally the operations of government. We do all this A/B testing. We learn from our customers. Government doesn't do that. How do we instrument government programs so that they can become more intelligent, so they can work better? And you start thinking, wow, we could actually reinvent government so that it works as well as the best tech applications. That's actually this wonderful way to do a digital transformation of the largest customer in the country. That would be an enormous opportunity. And if you start using small businesses, if you start using the latest technology. So right now our procurement processes are so optimized for dinosaurs who are not using the latest technology. And there's small companies everywhere that could be, brought in to help modernize government. I think that would be an awesome use of government,
That's terrific. And just to exercise moderator's privilege, there is a couple exhibits in the book that show investments by governments and private sector in training have been declining on a multi-year level across the G20. Other, right here in the middle.
Hi, Caroline Fairchild with LinkedIn. This question actually comes from a LinkedIn member. We shared McKinsey's research with our member base earlier today and asked what questions they might have. In the face of rising automation, how probable is the idea of universal basic income? Tim, you talk about jobs that are currently getting unpaid or underpaid. How do we change that, and what does UBI come into play here? I don't know who wants to take it.
Yeah, the thing that I wonder about with UBI, I mean, it's certainly a really worthwhile thing to test, and I think we should be testing it not universally, but testing it in a targeted way. Doing A/B testing of what happens when you do it, and people like Y Combinator are trying to do that. Give directly. So there are experiments. I think we should see government experimenting. We want to let's try it in some area and see what happens. But I also think that there are other ways to do the equivalent, and that they may be more usefully targeted. I mentioned earlier this idea that education as an intervention, where you take people out. You don't only take people out of the workforce, you give them new skills. And I go, like, would we be better off giving everybody an education benefit of a different kind? Where we pay you, to learn new skills, as opposed to just giving you money. Now, again, I think there's something wonderful about the idea of just giving people money, but we actually have hundreds of years of experience that shows that making sure that people get education is, and I go, well, that's another thing. Let's experiment with that. Let's just do lots of experiments. But the main thing is to get more money into people's hands, however we do it, as opposed to letting all this capital sit idle on the sidelines while people are effectively, basically we've got this atherosclerotic, circulatory system in our economy where there's just not enough money getting to ordinary people who can spend it, who can spend on whatever they want. So, throw it out of an airplane, do it with UBI, do it with targeted benefits, however you do it, get more money into people's hands.
For reasons that are unclear, economists prefer helicopters. Zoe, any thoughts?
I think people want to feel engaged, they want to feel they contribute, they want to grow in their earning potential, and I'm not a fan of that proposal.
Please, right here.
Hi, my name is Eric Dunn. Question for both of you is, do you have concrete examples of arguments that you've used with, let's say, large employers to convince them to, rather than just seeking to automate the current work of their employees, to actually use technology to augment the capacities of their employees and realize the full potential, let's say, of that, and not be afraid of it? So a few examples that you use effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's actually the central lesson of technology. Augment people, you will be more successful. So the ones I've been using, first of all, I talk a lot about Uber and Lyft. We have a lot more people delivering driving services than we ever had in the taxi industry because we have this cognitive augmentation in the app that tells people, wow, there's a passenger, 3 blocks over, or half a mile away, or 2 miles away, or 5 miles away. You can go find them. And not only that, the app will teach you how to get them to their destination wherever it is. That's a cognitive augmentation with a smartphone app and a dispatch system that's so far more advanced. It's put many more people at work. Amazon, put 45,000 robots into their warehouses, hired 250,000 people because they didn't say, we're just going to make more money doing the same thing more cheaply. They said, we're going to augment our warehouse workers so they can get more products out faster. We now do same-day delivery in many locations of more and more products. And you go, bang, you put people to work. How would we do that in healthcare, for example? How would we do that in education? Give our teachers superpowers through, digital education so they could do more. Those are, I think, pretty concrete. Or the Apple store. Everybody else was taking salespeople out of the stores. Apple put lots more people in, gave them superpowers with their smartphone apps. Got rid of the cash registers, replaced it. All of a sudden, become the most productive retail stores in the world. There are lots of examples when you look around.
In addition to Skillful, which is working on the ground and trying to change the labor markets, we also have something going at Marco called the Rework America Task Force, and some of the people in this room have been involved with that. And one of the things we're interested in is how we can use artificial intelligence, and that we're working on now, is using AI to make jobs safer. So that's in construction. It's very important in healthcare. How do you use AI to make a whole range of healthcare services safer? And I think there's just tremendous potential for people to have a lived experience of working alongside technology or having AI enhance their work if we can get people into the digital economy labor market. Another example that I find very appealing, because I spend a lot of time in other countries, is Google Translate. Now, the notion that I could have, wireless earphones that are going to tell me what someone's just said in a language I can understand is a tremendous enabler. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to experience AI and automation as really additive if we can get them engaged in this part of the labor market.
And I know we could talk for the rest of the evening with these terrifically thoughtful colleagues, but we have others here, and I love ending this section on a note of optimism. So thank you very much. I want to invite, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to invite